Good evening, everyone. We've got a few people on Zoom here, and I understand we have some more people on YouTube and Facebook. My name's Jamyang. I'll be leading the teaching this evening and the next few weeks as well for the remaining 4 lessons of this term, of term 4 of 2023, which is on the Jatakamala, the previous births of the Buddha. So as usual, we need to hone our motivation by doing the prayers and remembering that these prayers of refuge and bodhicitta and the 4 immeasurables and the request for teachings are not just a formality, but they pervade our consciousness for the duration of this sit. We've decided to put this time aside and to not do other things in this 1.5 hours or so. We could have watched a movie or something like that, but we've decided to do something more meaningful and productive and resourceful in a spiritual sense. So we need to acknowledge that and give ourselves that acknowledgement. And we do this by doing the prayers at the beginning and the end. Remembering we're not just doing this out of curiosity or for entertainment, but trying to get some deep insights into how the Buddha taught, what he taught, and why he taught it. So this is very insightful because these stories definitely have a certain pattern to them, as I'll get into once we begin the main teaching. So we'll begin with the refuge and generation of bodhicitta. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. According to the intelligence and predisposition of each being, we ask that you turn the Dharma wheel of great law and common vehicles. So the segment of the Buddhist canon that we're covering this term, this is being week 5 out of the 8 weeks, is called the Jatakamala. Jataka, Ja in Sanskrit is a root that means birth, or Ja or Jan means birth or born. It's cognate with the English word to generate. They sound similar. So these words that sound similar from the same language family, in this case Indo-European, to which English and Sanskrit both belong, they share this similar root. And then the mala is an interesting idea too. So this is a mala, these beads, prayer beads. So it's why it's called the Jataka Mala is because if we look at this idea, Buddhist idea, and especially in other Indian religions as well, this idea of reincarnation or rebirth, we have different, pretend that each life on a continuum is a bead. So this particular bead is my present life. So the Buddhist theory would have it that I have quite a few, or if not infinite, close to infinite lives behind me, and lives in the future as well. And these are connected by some sort of continuity that is not different from, but we can't actually say that it's the same as, the particular beads themselves. So there is some sort of continuity that continues from one bead to the next, but it's not really some sort of soul or self that we might initially presume. At most we can call it a continuity. Samtana in Sanskrit means continuity. This is like the string that connects all the beads. That's a very interesting way of thinking about rebirth. And it's also very interesting that Buddha tells all these stories and simply takes for granted that he's had all these past lives, which is amazing. It's almost like reading these stories that sort of subliminally tells us that this is the reality, this is how the nature of our past and present lives work. So these stories I'm going to teach the next few weeks from the Pali canon, because this is the one I'm more familiar with in this particular subject. I have the Pali Text Society edition of the canon at home, which has been translated into English. So to my understanding, the Mahayana uses the idea of a bodhisattva as anyone aspiring towards enlightenment. So that can be us, because we find some qualities in the Buddha that we would like to have. So this term bodhisattva has almost taken on a new and more universal meaning in the Mahayana. However, to my knowledge, the Pali or Theravadan tradition doesn't quite go so far, and the term bodhisattva is more or less limited to the actual Buddha's past lives, when he was a being aspiring to or destined to be enlightened. So it's very good to practice listening to these stories. It does require some patience and faith, and it's not as spoon-fed to us as it might be if it was some sort of movie or cartoon or adventure story. It is just someone reading from a book, but there's no real difficult philosophy in the teachings. They're just interesting stories. And as I said, we have to remind ourselves throughout the teachings, we have to ask ourselves why we think the Buddha taught like this. He must have been aware of impermanence and the fact that, he taught for I think something like 45 years or something, but he must have been aware that every teaching he gave would have a very vast and profound effect on people for many generations. So he must have taught like this for a particular reason. So I think we need to keep reminding ourselves to ask why he taught like this. So as I said, this version that I'll be reading for is from the Pali Text Society, and this particular translation was done in the late 19th century, so it's got some quite old language, which is quite quaint, and you get used to it after a while. So it's from the Tipitaka, or in Sanskrit we would call it the Tripitaka. You see, Sanskrit and Pali are very similar languages. They just have sort of slight spelling and pronunciation differences up here and there. Tipitaka literally means the three baskets, and so this is part of the official Buddhist canon that's been translated into English. And I'm also reading the Mahabharata, which Rinpoche has mentioned in the last week or two, which is a very similar idea to these stories. It has a lot of characters coming in and out, and also translated in the late 19th century, so it has some interesting old phrases and stuff, like instead of saying he woke up in the morning and had breakfast, they would say he woke up the morning to break his fast. So it sort of has old funny turns of language like that. So I've decided what I'm going to do. Rinpoche has left it with me. Maybe I should put this mic near me, that should help in case the sound wasn't too good. So I'm just going to start from the very start and we'll see how far we go. I'm planning to sit for about an hour and a half total. So we'll just see how far we get in that time. So I'll basically just read from the text, and where I see something that I feel worth explaining, I'll do that. So, praised be to the Blessed One, the Arahat, the perfect Buddha. Blessed One is a translation of Bhagavan, another word for Buddha. It means Blessed One, fortunate, that type of thing. Arhat in Sanskrit, or Arahat in Pali, means one who is deserving of praise. There's the word Buddha, and there's a very old dictionary that has about 80 different terms for the word Buddha, because there's so many ways to explain what he achieved. So, Book 1, Eka Nipata. And the number one story of this book is called the Apanaka Jataka. This discourse regarding truth was delivered by the Blessed One while he was dwelling in the great monastery at Jetavana near Savatthi, place in India. But who, you ask, was it that led up to this tale? Well, it was the treasurer's 500 friends, disciples of the Sophists. Sophists here, footnote says, usually translated as heretics. For one day, Anathapindika, this is the name of his name literally means feeder of the poor or the unprotected. He was a great patron of the Buddha. For one day, Anathapindika, the treasurer, took his friends, the 500 disciples of other schools, and went off with them to Jetavana, where the monastery was, whither also he had a great store brought of garlands, perfumes, and unguents. Unguents is like similar to perfumes, together with oil, honey, molasses, cloths, and cloaks. After due salutation to the Buddha's Blessed One, he made his offering to him of the garlands and the like, and handed over to the order of the brethren, again old-fashioned language, talking about the Sangha, the medicinal oil and so forth, together with the cloths. And, this done, he took his seat on one side, eschewing the 6 faults, sitting down. Eschewing means giving up. So I did quickly read this before. It doesn't mention what the 6 faults are lying down, but I suppose it's things like leaning your back or slouching, that kind of thing. There's lots of lists like that tell you lists of ways not to sit down, that type of thing. Likewise, those disciples of other schools saluted the Buddha, which probably means bow down, and took their seats close by the side of Anathapindika, gazing upon the master's countenance, his face, glorious as the full moon, upon his excellent presence, endowed with the signs and marks of Buddhahood. That looks like to me like the 32 major and 80 minor marks, and encompassed to a fathom's length. Fathom is like about 6 foot. That's how long it is if you stretch your arms out. And encompassed to a fathom's length with light. So it's talking about his aura around him. And upon the rich glory that marks a Buddha, a glory which issued as it were in paired garlands, pair upon pair. This reminds me, the Buddhist flag It has those different colors, like I think it goes blue, yellow, red, white, orange, and then it has all of them as little squares at the bottom or at the right. This is a relatively recent invention, so I'm going off on a tangent, but that's okay. This is only invented like 100 or 200 years ago by some Westerner. But the beauty of it is that, and I read this in a sutra that was translated very recently, in the last year or a few years, those are the actual colours that they reported was the Buddha's aura. So Buddha had these, 6 shades of light, and here it says, a whole fathom's length, and that he also had these types of lights zapping out of his eyes when he looked at something. So they also have other ways of explaining those colours, like, I'm not sure what it is, red equals this, blue equals this, that, different qualities and so forth, but I find it very beautiful, the idea that these are the colours that the Buddha had as an aura that some people witnessed. Then, though in a thunderous tone, as of a young lion roaring in the red valley, or as of a storm cloud in the rainy season, bringing down, as it were, the Ganges of the heavens, i.e. the Milky Way, says the footnote, and seeming to weave a chaplet of jewels, yet in a voice of eightfold perfection, the charm of which ravished the ear, he preached to them the truth, i.e. the Dharma, truth with a capital T, in a discourse full of sweetness and bright with varied beauty. They, after hearing the Master's, Buddha's discourse, rose up with hearts converted, and with due salutation to the Lord of Knowledge, burst asunder the other doctrines in which they had taken refuge, and betook themselves to the Buddha as their refuge. Thenceforth, without ceasing, they used to go with Anatta Pindika, carrying in their hands perfumes and garlands and the like, to hear the truth in the monastery, and they abounded in charity, kept the commandments, precepts, and kept the weekly fast day. That's probably referring to, I haven't heard of fasting being for a full day every week. Though I have heard of lay people fasting for the afternoon, after lunch, one day a month or one day a week. Now the Blessed One went from Savatthi, so this is Pali for Shravasti, which you may have heard of. It's famous as the one place where the Buddha displayed miracles in India. Now the Blessed One from Savatthi went back to Rajagaha again. Rajagaha would be Rajagurha in Sanskrit. The palace of the king, literally. Raja means king, Gaha or Gurha means house. It's where he taught the Heart Sutra, which is a Mahayana text. As soon as the Buddha had gone, they burst asunder their new faith. So these are the heretics that we mentioned before, and returning to the other doctrines as their refuge, reverted to their original state. So they changed their minds. After some 7 or 8 months' stay, the Blessed One came back to Jetavana. Once again, too, did Anatta Pindika come with those friends of his to the Master, make his salutation and offering of perfumes and the like, and take his seat on one side. And the friends also saluted the Blessed One, and took their seats in like manner. Then did Anatta Pindika tell the Blessed One how, when the Buddha had departed on his alms pilgrimage, his friends had forsaken their refuge for their old doctrines again, and had reverted to their original state. Opening the lotus of his mouth, as though it were a casket of jewels, scented with scents, divine and filled with diverse perfumes by virtue of his having ever spoken aright throughout myriad eons. These are the benefits of right speech. The Blessed One made his sweet voice come forth as he inquired, Is the report true to you, disciples? Is the report true that you, disciples have forsaken the three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, for the refuge of other doctrines. And when they, unable to conceal the fact, had confessed, saying, "It is true, Blessed One," then said the Master, "Disciples, not between the bounds of hell below and the highest heaven above, not in all the infinite worlds that stretch right and left, is there the equal, much less the superior, of a Buddha in the excellences which spring from obeying the precepts, commandments, and from other virtuous conduct." It has a cute footnote to the word hell. That's why I paused there. So the footnote to the word hell says, "Strictly speaking, Buddhism knows no hells, only purgatories, which, though places of torment, are temporary and educational." Then he declared to them the excellences of the three gems as they are revealed in the sacred texts, the following amongst the number. "Of all creature brethren, were the footless, etc., of these Buddhas, the Buddha is the chief. Whatsoever riches there be in this or other worlds, etc., and verily the chief of the faithful, etc." Thence he went on to say, "No disciples, male or female, who seek refuge in the three gems, that are endowed with such peerless excellences, are ever reborn into hell and the like states, but, released from all rebirth into states of suffering, they pass to the realm of devas, the gods, or heavens, and there receive great glory. Therefore, in forsaking such a refuge for that offered by other doctrines, you have gone astray." And here the following sacred text should be cited to make it clear that none who, to find release in the supreme good, have sought refuge in the three gems, shall be born into states of suffering. "Those who have refuge in the Buddha found shall not pass hence to states of suffering. Straightway when they shall quit their human frame, a deva form these faithful ones shall fill." So it says that for those who have found refuge in the Buddha, and it repeats this verse, just saying, etc., etc., for those who have found refuge in the doctrine, i.e. the Dharma, or Buddha Dharma, to be more specific. And then, so it says, I'll read the whole verse, "Those who have refuge in the doctrine found shall not pass hence to states of suffering. Straightway when they shall quit the human frame, a deva form these faithful ones shall fill." It's saying they'll go to heaven, basically. And then thirdly, those who have refuge in the order found, order meaning Sangha, so this is old-fashioned way of translation where they would they keep the word Buddha, they've decided that's a naturalized English word from the Sanskrit or Pali, but then rather than Dharma, they've decided to translate it as doctrine with a capital D, and then rather than Sangha, they translated it as order with a capital O, which is a bit old-fashioned for us, I guess. "Those who have refuge in the order found shall not pass hence to states of suffering. Straightway when they shall quit their human frame, a deva form those faithful ones shall fill." They're manifold, the refuges men seek, the mountain peak, the forest solitude, and so on down to when he this refuge shall have sought and found, entire release is his from every pain. Or hers, we should say. But the Master did not end his teaching to them at this point, for he went on to say, "Disciples, meditation on the thought of the Buddha, meditation on the thought of the truth, meditation on the thought of the brotherhood," that's the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, this it is that gives entry and fruition of the first, the second, the third, and the fourth paths to bliss. And when he preached the truth, capital T, to them in these other ways, he said, "In forsaking such a refuge as this, you have gone astray." And here the gift of the several paths to those who meditate on the thought
of the Buddha and so forth should be made clear by such scriptures as the following. One thing there is, brethren, which, if practiced and developed, conduces to utter loathing of the world's vanities, to the cessation of passion, to the end of being, to peace, to insight, to enlightenment, to nirvana. What is this one thing? The meditation on the thought of the Buddha. When he had thus exhorted the disciples, the Blessed One said, So too in times past the disciples, the men and women we should say, who jumped to the fortuitous conclusion that what was no refuge was a real refuge, fell a prey to goblins in a demon-haunted wilderness and were utterly destroyed, while the men who clave to the absolute and indisputable truth prospered in the selfsame wilderness. And when he had said this, he became silent. Then, rising up from his seat and saluting the Blessed One, the layman Anathapindika burst into praises, and with clasped palms raised in reverence to his forehead, spoke thus. It is clear to us, sir, that in these present days these disciples were led by error into forsaking the supreme refuge. But the bygone destruction of those opinionated ones in the demon-haunted wilderness, and the prospering of the men who clave to the truth, are hidden from us and known only to you. May it please the Blessed One, as though causing the full moon to rise in the sky, to make this thing clear to us. And then said the Blessed One, It was solely to brush away the world's difficulties that by the display of the 10 perfections, interesting that they're in the Pali as well as the Sanskrit, though myriad aeons I won omniscience. Give ear and hearken as closely as if you were filling a tube of gold with lion's marrow. Having thus excited the treasurer's attention, he made clear the thing that rebirth had concealed from them, as though he were releasing the full moon from the upper air, the birthplace of their snows. So all that's just a prelude as to how the setting as to how he actually gave the teaching, which begins now. Once on a time in the city of Benares, that's Varanasi as we know it, in the Kasi country, there was a king named Brahmadatta. In those days, the Bodhisattva was born into a merchant's family, and growing up in due course, used to journey about, trading with 500 carts, travelling now from east to west, and now from west to east. There was also at Benares another young merchant, a stupid blockhead lacking resource. Now at the time of our story, the Bodhisattva had loaded, actually in Pali it says Bodhisattva without a V at the end, but out of habit I just say Bodhisattva. Now at the time of our story, the Bodhisattva had loaded 500 carts with costly wares of Benares, and had got them all ready to start. And so had the foolish young merchant also too. Thought the Bodhisattva, if this foolish young merchant keeps me company all along, and the 1,000 carts travel along together, it'll be too much for the road. It'll be a hard matter to get wood, water, and so forth for the men, or grass for the oxen. Either he or I must go on first. So he sent for the other and laid his view before him, saying, The two of us can't travel together. Would you rather go first or last? Thought the other, There will be many advantages if I go on first. I shall have a road which is not yet cut up. My oxen will have the pick of the grass. My men will have the pick of the herbs for curry. The water will be undisturbed. And lastly, I shall fix my own price for the barter of my goods. Accordingly, he replied, I will go first, my dear sir. The Bodhisattva, on the other hand, saw many advantages in going last, for he argued thus to himself, Those who go first will level the road where it is rough, while I shall travel along the road they have already travelled. Their oxen will have grazed off the coarse old grass, while mine will pasture on the sweet young growth which will spring up in its place. My men will find a fresh growth of sweet herbs for curry, where the old ones have been picked. Where there is no water, the first caravan will have to dig to supply themselves, and we shall drink at the wells they dug. Haggling over prices is killing work, whereas I, following later, shall barter my wares at the price they have already fixed. Accordingly, seeing all these advantages, he said to the other, "Then you go first, my dear sir." "Very well, I will," said the foolish merchant, and he yoked his carts and set out. Journeying along, he left human habitations behind him and came to the outskirts of the wilderness. Now wildernesses here are of the 5 following kinds: robber wilderness, wild beast wildernesses, drought wildernesses, demon wildernesses, and famine wildernesses. The first is when the way is beset by robbers. The second is when they are beset by lions and other wild beasts. The third is when there is no bathing or water to be got. The fourth is when the road is beset by demons. And the fifth is when no roots or other food are to be found. And in this 5-fold category, the wilderness in question was both a drought and a demon wilderness. Accordingly, the young merchant took great big water jars on his carts, and filling them with water, set out to cross the 60 leagues of desert which lay before him. Now when he had reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin who haunted it said to himself, "I will make these men throw away their stock of water and devour them all when they are faint." So he framed by his magic power a delightful carriage drawn by pure white young bulls. With a retinue of some 10 or 12 goblins bearing bows and quivers, swords and shields, he rode along to meet them like a mighty lord in this carriage, with blue lotuses and white water lilies wreathed round his head, with wet hair and wet clothes, and with muddy carriage wheels. His attendants, too, in front and rear of them, went along with their hair and clothes wet, with garlands of blue lotuses and white water lilies in on their heads, and with bunches of white lotuses in their hands, chewing their esculent stalks, and dripping with water and mire. Now the leaders of caravans have the following custom. Whenever the wind blows in their teeth, they ride on in front of in their carriage with their attendants round them, in order to escape the dust. But when the wind blows from behind them, then they ride in like fashion in the rear of the column. And, as on this occasion the wind was blowing against them, the young merchant was riding in front. When the goblin became aware of the merchant's approach, he drew his carriage aside from the track and greeted him kindly, asking him whither he was going. The leader of the caravan too caused his carriage to be drawn aside from the track, so as to let the carts pass by, whilst he stayed by the way and thus addressed the goblin. "We are just on our way from Benares, sir, but I observe that you have lotuses and water lilies on your heads and in your hands, and that your people are chewing the esculent stalks, and that you are all muddy and dripping with wet. Pray, did it rain while you were on the road? And did you come on pools covered with lotuses and water lilies?" Hereon the goblin exclaimed, "What did you say? Why, yonder appears the dark green streak of the forest, and thence onward there is nothing but water all through the forest. It is always raining there. The pools are full, and on every side are lakes covered with lotuses and water lilies." Then, as the line of carts passed by, he asked where they were bound for. "To such and such a place," was the reply. "And what wares have you got in this cart and in this?" "So and so. And what might you have in this last cart, which seems to move as if it were heavily laden?" "Oh, there's water in that." "You did well to carry water with you on the other side, from the other side, but there is no need for it now, as water is abundant on ahead. So break the jars and throw the water away, that you may travel easier." And he added, "Now continue on your way, as we have stopped too long already." Then he went a little way further on, till he was out of sight, when he made his way back to the goblin city where he dwelt. Such was the folly of that foolish merchant, that he did the goblin's bidding, and he had his jars broken, and the water all thrown away. without saving so much even as would go in the palm of a man's hand. Then he ordered the carts to drive on. Not a drop of water did they find on ahead, and thirst exhausted the men. All day long till the sun went down they kept on the march, but at sunset they unyoked their carts and made a laager, L-A-A-G-E-R. I'm not familiar with that word. Teething the oxen to the wheels. The oxen had no water to drink, and the men none to cook their rice with, and the tired old band sank to the ground to slumber. But as soon as night fell, the goblins came out from their city, and slew every one of those men and oxen, and when they had devoured their flesh, leaving only the bare bones, the goblins departed. Thus was the foolish young merchant the sole cause of the destruction of that whole band, whose skeletons were strewn in every conceivable direction, whilst the 500 carts stood there, with their loads untouched. Now the Bodhisattva allowed some 6 weeks to pass by after the starting of the foolish young merchant before he set out. Then he proceeded from the city with his 500 carts, and in due course came to the outskirts of the wilderness. Here he had his water jars filled and laid in an ample stock of water, and by beat of drum he had his men assembled in camp, and thus addressed them. Let not so much as a palmful of water be used without my sanction. There are poison trees in this wilderness, so let no man among you eat any leaf, flower or fruit from which he has not eaten before without first asking me. With this exhortation to his men, he pushed on into the wilderness with his 500 carts. When he had reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin made his appearance on the Bodhisattva's path, as in the former case. But as soon as he became aware of the goblin, the Bodhisattva saw through him, for he thought to himself, There's no water here in this waterless desert. This person with his red eyes and aggressive bearing casts no shadow. Very likely he has induced the foolish young merchant who preceded me to throw away all his water, and then, waiting till they were worn out, has eaten up the merchant with all his men. But he doesn't know my cleverness and ready wit. Then he shouted to the goblin, Begone! We're men of business, and do not throw away what water we have got before we see where more is to come from. But when we do see more, we may be trusted to throw this water away and lighten our carts. The goblin rode on a bit further till he was out of sight, and then betook himself back to his home in the demon city. But when the goblin had gone, the Bodhisattva's men said to him, Sir, we heard from those men that yonder is the dark green streak of the forest appearing, where they said it was always raining. They had got lotuses on their heads, and water lilies in their hands, and were eating the stalks, whilst their clothes and hair were wringing wet, and with water streaming them off them. Let us throw away our water and get a bit quicker with lightened carts. On hearing these words, the Bodhisattva ordered a halt, and had all the men mustered. Tell me, said he, did any man among you ever hear before today that there was a lake or a pool in this wilderness? No, sir, was the answer. Why, it's known as the waterless desert. We have just been told by some people that it is raining just on ahead, in the belt of the forest. Now, how far does a rain wind carry? A league, sir. A league is an old-fashioned way of measurement. I think it's like there are different ways of measuring it. I think it tends to be about 5 kilometers or something. And here it's translating a similar term from the Pali, which is probably yojana, which is Sanskrit or something similar, which is, again, it's like an old-fashioned way of measuring, which is maybe 3 or 5 kilometers or something. Anyway, so how far off can you see the crest of a storm cloud? A league, sir. That sounds about right. And has any one man here seen the top of even a single storm cloud? No, sir. How far off can you see a flash of lightning? 4 or 5 leagues, sir. And has one man here seen a flash of lightning? No, sir. How far off can a man hear a peal of thunder? 2 or 3 leagues, sir. And has any man here heard a peal of thunder? No, sir. These are not men but goblins. They will return in the hope of devouring us when we are weak and faint, after throwing away our water at their bidding. As the young merchant who went on before us was not a man of resource, most likely he has been fooled into throwing his water away and has been devoured when exhaustion ensued. We may expect to find his 500 carts standing just as they were loaded for the start. We shall come on them today. Press on with all possible speed, without throwing away a drop of water. Urging his men forward with these words, he proceeded on his way till he came upon the 500 carts, standing just as they had been loaded, and the skeletons of the men and oxen lying strewn in every direction. He had his carts unyoked and ranged in a circle so as to form a strong lager. We have that funny word again. He saw that his men and oxen had their supper early, and that the oxen were made to lie down in the middle with the men round them. And he himself, with the leading men of his band, stood on guard, sword in hand, through the 3 watches of the night, waiting for the day to dawn. On the morrow, that's an old-fashioned way of saying the next day, at daybreak, when he had his oxen fed and everything needful done, he discarded his own weak carts for stronger ones, and his own common goods for the most costly of the derelict goods. Then he went on to his destination, where he bartered his stock for wares of 2 or 3 times their value, and came back to his own city without losing a single man out of all his company. And that's the story. This story ended, the master said, "Thus it was, laymen, that in times past the fatuous came to utter destruction, while those who clave to the truth, escaping from the demon's hands, reached their goal in safety and came back to their home again." And when he had thus linked the 2 stories together, he, as the Buddha, spoke the following stanza for the purposes of this lesson of the truth. Then some declared the soul the peerless truth, but otherwise the false logicians spake. Let him that's wise from this lesson take, and firmly grasp the soul, the peerless truth. Thus did the Blessed One teach this lesson respecting truth. And he went on to say, what is called walking by truth not only bestows the 3 happy endowments, the 6 heavens of the realm of sense, and the endowments of the higher realm of Brahma, but finally is the giver of arahatship, whilst what was called waking by untruth entails rebirth in the 4 states of punishment, or in the lowest castes of mankind. Further, the Master went on to expound in the 16 ways the 4 truths, at the close of which all those 500 disciples were established in the fruit of the first path. Having delivered his lesson and his teaching, and having told the 2 stories and established the connection linking them together, the Master concluded by identifying the birth as follows. This is the part. This is like the last jigsaw piece, isn't it? The one that puts everything together. Devadatta was the foolish young merchant of those days. His followers were the followers of that merchant, and the foolish ones, in other words. And the followers of the Buddha were the wise merchant, who was myself. So Devadatta, as we know, if we know a bit about Buddha's life story, Devadatta was his jealous cousin, or even evil cousin. He even caused a schism amongst the Sangha, and he declared that he was just as enlightenment. He was really consumed by jealousy. He was around the same age as the Buddha, and in the same circumstances, yet the Buddha received all this praise as a spiritual teacher. And Devadatta, rather than being humble, decided to, he even, like we know about the major and minor marks that Buddha had on his body, he had wheels that you could see on the palms of his hand. And Devadatta even went to the extent of tattooing these major and minor marks on his body. And there are other stories that about the Buddha's evil cousin Devadatta. So as we see here, that wasn't the first time that Devadatta and the Buddha had a karmic connection. So that's the first story of the first section of the first book of the Pali Jatakamala. It's interesting when he talks about following the truth or following the wise way of the master, or the traveller in this case, wasn't it, a merchant. They're not so much talking about. See, in Buddhism there are two kinds of wisdom. There's worldly wisdom, lokajnana, lokasya jnana, meaning worldly wisdom, and then there's transcendental wisdom, lokotara jnana. So jnana means wisdom, lokotara means transcendental, and really all I would go as far as to say any culture in the world has some sort of worldly wisdom. And everyone has some sort of worldly wisdom that they learn throughout their lives, whether it's professional or simply ways, customs, things what we call mottos and things that keep us going throughout the day, and that type of thing. Common sense, I guess you could say. Yeah, so worldly wisdom is very much like common sense, which is a good start. And I think in general Dharma is a bit more than that. Dharma supposes that there's a wisdom that goes beyond worldly conventions, and this is what we're trying to tap into as Buddhists. But these stories are very, very good place to start and ground ourselves in some of the. Because as Rinpoche mentioned like a week or two ago, some of these stories are very similar to what's found in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is like an Indian epic, like similar to the epics of Greece. Not that I'm very well versed in the Western epics, but I myself am reading a late 19th century translation of the Mahabharata, and it's just got lots of different stories like these. And so not necessarily Buddhist, but very, very Indian. And it even has a story it even has a small section which has a story about how the idea of the Vajra, the thunderbolt, comes about, which is I've maintained since the day I've heard about that. I've maintained, that's very important for us as Tibetan Buddhist practitioners to understand a little bit of that idea, because you might read books and stuff that say that, Vajra means diamond, that type of thing. Yeah, that's true to an extent. In a contextual meaning, Vajra can mean diamond, because diamond is supposedly the hardest substance, and means, therefore, Vajra has an idea of strength or indestructibility. But it's a little deeper than that. It's like a thunderbolt, it's like a weapon, and it's the hardest substance in the universe. And there's a whole story about how there was a rishi. A rishi is like an old meditator in ancient India who meditated so strenuously and for so long that his bones hardened to be the hardest substance in the universe, and he gave up his body so that Indra could use his thunderbolt as a weapon to destroy the enemies, the demons. So that's part of the story, and I hope we can go on to story number 2 now, which is called Vanupata Jataka. It doesn't give a translation. I'll see if it does in the contents. No. In the contents it summarizes it. Traveling across a desert, a caravan through mistake, throws away its water, etc. In their despair, the leader has a well dug, till far down water is found, and perseverance saves the caravan from death. So that's a summary. So as we know, it goes for there's a good page of small text on the context about how the story came about, and then there's the actual story, which goes for a couple of pages, and then there's this conclusion which pieces together who's who. Always the same formula, hundreds of times. Amazing. You can see here how, karma and rebirth are really like, we call them beliefs. They're definitely something we have to entertain as someone who's aspiring as a Buddhist. But yeah, definitely they were given in traditional Buddhist thought. Karma and rebirth are definitely, they go part and parcel with Buddhist theory. Untiring, deep they dug. This discourse was delivered by the Blessed One whilst he was dwelling at Savatthi. About whom, you ask? About a brother who gave up persevering. So brother is like an old-fashioned, with a capital B, old-fashioned word for monk in the brotherhood, or brethren. Tradition says that, whilst the Buddha was dwelling at Savatthi, there came to Jatakamala a scion, I think it's pronounced, or scion, means like a representative of a Savatthi family, who, on hearing a discourse by the master, realized that lusts breed suffering, and was admitted to the first stage of the brotherhood. After a few years passed in preparing for admission to full brotherhood, when he had learnt 2 summaries and had trained himself in the methods of insight, he obtained from the master a theme for meditation which commended itself to him. Retiring to a forest, he passed there the rainy season. But for all his striving during the 3 months, he could not develop a glimmer or an inkling of insight. So the thought came to him, the master said there were 4 types of men, and I must belong to the lowest of all. In this birth, methinks, there is neither path nor fruit for me. What good shall I do by living in the forest? Back to the master I will go, and live my life beholding the glories of the Buddha's presence, and listening to his sweet teachings. And back again to Jatakamala he came. Now his friends and intimates said, Sir, it was you who obtained from the master a theme for meditation, and departed to live the solitary life of a sage. Yet here you are back again, going about enjoying fellowship. Can it be that you won the crown of the brother's vocation, and that you will never know rebirth? See? Precisely, as I was saying, the goal in these early Buddhist texts is to not be reborn. So if we're umming and ahhing about rebirth, it shows that, there's definitely a dimension of the teachings that we're missing out on. Sirs, as I won neither path nor fruit, I felt myself doomed to futility, and so gave up persevering and came back. You have done wrong, sir, in showing a faint heart when you have devoted yourself to the doctrine of the dauntless master. Come, let us bring you to the Buddha's notice. And they took him with them to the master. When the master became aware of their coming, he said, Brethren, you bring with you this brother against his will. What has he done? Sir, after devoting himself to so absolutely true a doctrine, this brother has given up persevering in the solitary life of a sage and has come back. Then said the master to him, Is it true as they say that you, brother, have given up persevering? It is true, Blessed One. But how comes it that after devoting yourself to such a doctrine, you, brother, should be the one to show yourself not a man desiring little, contented, solitary and determined, but a man lacking perseverance? Was it not Was it not you who was so stout-hearted in bygone days? Was it not by you that single-handed, thanks to your perseverance, that in a sandy desert the men and the oxen belonging to a caravan of 500 carts got water and were cheered? And how is it that now you are giving in? These words suffice to give heart to that brother. Hearing this talk, the brethren asked the Blessed One, saying, Sir, the present faint-heartedness of this brother is clear to us, but hidden from us is the knowledge of how, by the perseverance of this single man, the men and oxen got water in a sandy desert and were cheered. This is known only to you who are omniscient. Pray, tell us about it. Hearken then, brethren, said the Blessed One, and having excited their attention, he made clear the thing that rebirth had concealed from them. Yeah, so rebirth is such like a shock for most of us that it conceals the memory of what's happened before. So, the actual story. Once upon a time, when Brahmadatta was king in Benares, in Kasi, must be a region, the Bodhisattva was born into a trader's family. When he was grown up, he used to travel about trading with 500 carts. On one occasion he came to a sandy wilderness 60 leagues across, the sand of which was so fine that, when grasped, it slipped through the fingers of the closed fist. As soon as the sun got up, it grew as hot as a bed of charcoal embers, and nobody could walk upon it. Accordingly, those traversing it used to take firewood, water, oil, rice, and so forth on their carts, and only travelled by night. At dawn they used to range their carts in a circle to form a laager, with an awning spread overhead, and after an early meal used to sit in the shade all day long. When the sun went down, they had their evening meal, and, so soon as the ground became cool, they used to yoke their carts and move forward. Travelling on this desert was like voyaging over the sea. A desert pilot, as he was called, had to convoy them over by knowledge of the stars. And this was the way in which our merchant was now travelling that wilderness. When he had only some 7 more miles before him, he thought to himself, Tonight we will see out of this sandy wilderness. So, after they had had their supper, he ordered the wood and water to be thrown away, and yoking his carts, set out on the road. In the front cart sat the pilot upon a couch, looking up to the stars and heavens and directing the course thereby. But so long had he been without sleep that he was tired out and fell asleep, with the result that he did not mark that the oxen had turned round and that were retracing their steps. All night the oxen kept on their way, but at dawn the pilot woke up and, observing the disposition of the stars overhead, shouted out, "Turn the carts round! Turn the carts round!" And as they turned the carts round and were forming them into line, the day broke. "Why, this is where we camped yesterday," cried the people of the caravan. "All our wood and water is gone, and we're lost." So saying, they unyoked their carts and made a laager and spread the awning overhead. Then each man flung himself down in despair beneath his own cart. Thought the Bodhisattva to himself, "If I give in, every single one will perish." So he ranged to and fro while it was still early and cool, until he came on a clump of kusha grass. "This grass," thought he, "can only have grown up here thanks to the presence of water underneath." So he ordered a spade to be brought and a hole to be dug at that spot. 60 cubits down they dug, till at that depth the spade struck on a rock, and everybody lost heart. But the Bodhisattva, feeling sure that there must be water under that rock, descended into the hole and took his stand up upon the rock. Stooping down, he applied his ear to it and listened. Catching the sound of water flowing beneath, he came out and said to the serving lad, "My boy, if you give in, we shall all perish. So take heart and courage. Go down into the hole with this iron sledgehammer and strike the rock." Obedient to his master's bidding, the lad, resolute where all others had lost heart, went down and struck the rock. The rock which had dammed the stream split asunder and fell in. Up rose the water in the hole till it was as high as the palm tree, and everybody drank and bathed. Then they chopped up their spare axles and yokes and other surplus gear, cooked their rice and ate it, and fed their oxen. And as soon as the sun set in, they hoisted a flag by the side of the well and travelled on to their destination. There they bartered away their goods for twice and 4 times their value. With their proceeds, they returned to their own home, where they lived out the term of life, and in the end passed away to fare thereafter according to their deserts. The Bodhisattva too, after a life spent in charity and other good works, passed away likewise to fare according to his deserts. And that ends that story. When the Supreme Buddha had delivered this discourse, he, the all-knowing one himself, uttered this stanza. Untiring, deep they dug that sandy track, till in the trodden way they water found. So let the sage in perseverance strong flag not nor tire until his heart finds peace. This discourse ended, he preached the 4 truths, at the close whereof the faint-hearted brother was established in the highest fruit of all, which is arhatship. Having told these 2 stories, the master established the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying, This faint-hearted brother of today was in those days the serving land who, persevering, broke the rock and gave water to all the people. The Buddha's followers were the rest of the people of the caravan, and I myself was their leader. So there we go. In 2 lives, the Buddha has encouraged this other person who has a karmic link to him as a junior. Firstly, by saying, getting him to strike the rock in that previous life, and in this life to end all rebirth. Very interesting karma. Somewhere I read recently, I don't recall exactly where, but it said karma is supposedly a very intricate and very difficult and nuanced philosophical topic in Buddhism. But somewhere recently I read, it said that the karmic result is not the same as the cause, but nor is it different, which is a very interesting way of looking at it. To me it shows that it's something that has to be experienced, like Buddha experienced recollection of his former lives. It's something that has to be experienced rather than something theoretical. So, we're up to number 3. Serivanija Jataka, which is, from the contents, 2 hawkers are successively offered by its unwitting owners a golden ball. The greedy hawker overreaches himself, whilst the honest one is richly rewarded. We can see where this story is going to go. If in this faith, this lesson too was taught by the Blessed One while at Savatthi, also about a brother who gave up persevering. For when the man was brought by the brethren exactly as in the foregoing case, so there is some logical order to this, the Master said, You, brother, who after devoting yourself to this glorious doctrine which bestows path and fruit, are giving up persevering, will suffer long like the hawker of Seri, who lost a golden ball and worth 100,000 pieces. The brethren asked the Blessed One to explain this to them. The Blessed One made clear a thing concealed to them from them by rebirth. Once upon a time, in the kingdom of Seri, 5 eons ago, the Bodhisattva dealt in pots and pans and was called the Serivan. In the company of another dealer in the same wares, a greedy fellow who was also known as the Serivan, he came across the river Telavaha and entered the city or Andapura. Apportioning the streets between the two of them, he set about hawking his wares round the streets of his district, and the other did the same in his district. Now in that city there was a decayed family. Once they had been rich merchants, but by the time of our story they had lost all the sons and brothers and all their wealth. The sole survivors were a girl and her grandmother, and they got their living by working for hire. Nevertheless, they had got in their house the golden ball out of which in the old days the great merchant, the head of the family, used to eat. But it had been thrown among the pots and pans, and having been long out of use, was grimed over with dirt, so that the two women did not know it was gold. To the door of their house came the greedy hawker on his round, crying, "Water pots to sell, water pots to sell." And the damsel, when she was here and when she knew he was there, said to her grandmother, "Oh, do buy me a trinket, grandmother. We're very poor, dear. What can we offer in exchange for it?" "Why, here's this bowl which is no good to us. Let us change that for it." The old woman had the hawker brought in and seated, and gave him the bowl, saying, "Take this, sir, and be so good as to give your sister something or other in exchange." The hawker took the bowl in his hand, turned it over, and suspecting it was gold, scratched a line on the back of it with a needle, whereby he knew for certain that it was real gold. Then, thinking that he would get the pot without giving anything whatsoever for it to the women, he cried, "What's the value of this, pray? Why, it isn't worth half a farthing." And therewithal he threw the bowl on the ground, rose up from his seat, and left the house. Now, as it had been agreed between the two hawkers that the one might try the streets which the other had already been into, the Bodhisattva came into that same street and appeared at the door of the house, crying, "Water pots to sell." Once again the damsel made the same request of her grandmother, and the old woman replied, "My dear, the first hawker threw our bowl on the ground and flung out of the house. What have we got left to offer now?" "Oh, but that hawker was a harsh-spoken man, grandmother dear, whilst this one looks like a nice man and speaks kindly. Very likely he would take it." "Call him in then." So they came into the house, and they gave him a seat and put the bowl into his hands. Seeing that the bowl was gold, he said, "Mother, this bowl is worth 100,000 pieces. I haven't its value with me." "Sir, the first hawker who came here said that it was not worth half a farthing, so he threw it in the ground and went away. It must have been the efficacy of your own goodness which has turned this bowl into gold. Take it, give us something or other for it, and go your way." At the time the Bodhisattva had 500 pieces of money and a stock worth as much more. The whole of this he gave to them, saying, "Let me retain my scales, my bag, and 8 pieces of money." And with their consent he took those with him and departed with all speed to the riverside, where he gave his 8 coins to the boatman and jumped into the boat. Subsequently that greedy hawker had come back to the house, and had asked them to bring out their bowl, saying he would give something or other for it. But the old woman flew out at him with these words, "You made out that our golden bowl, which was worth 100,000 pieces, was not worth even a half farthing. But there came an upright hawker, your master I take it, who gave us 1,000 pieces for it and took the bowl away." Hereupon he exclaimed, He has robbed me of a golden bowl worth 100,000 pieces. He has caused me a terrible loss." An intense sorrow came upon him, so that he lost command over himself and became like one distraught. His money and goods he flung away at the door of the house. He threw off his upper and undercloths, and armed with the beam of his scales as a club, he cracked the Bodhisattva down at the riverside. Finding the latter already crossing, he shouted at the boatman to come back, but the Bodhisattva told him not to do so. As the other stood there gazing at the retreating Bodhisattva, intense sorrow seized upon him. His heart grew hot, blood gushed from his lips, and his heart cracked like the mud at the bottom of a tank which the sun had dried up. Through the hatred which he contracted against the Bodhisattva, he perished then and there. in brackets it says, this was the first time Devadatta conceived a grudge against the Bodhisattva. Amazing grudge. The Bodhisattva, after a life spent in charity and in other good works, passed away to fare according to his deserts. That's the end of that. When the Supreme Buddha had ended this lesson, he, the all-knowing one himself, uttered this stanza. If in this faith you prove remiss and fail to win the goal whereto the teachings lead, then like the hawker called the Serivan, full long you'll rue the prize your folly lost. After having thus delivered his discourse in such a way as to lead up to arahatship, the master expounded the four truths, and at the close whereof the faint-hearted brother was established in that highest fruit of all, which is arahatship. And after telling the two stories, the master made the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying in conclusion, in those days Devadatta was the foolish hawker, and I myself was the wise and good hawker. So we've got a grudge here that goes over multiple lifetimes, which is very interesting, isn't it? Now it doesn't look like we'll have time. I'm planning to finish these lessons about 9:15. So it doesn't look like we'll have time to go through the whole of the next story, but I think we can actually at least do the beginning, the introductory part, and continue it next week. So this is number 4, called the Chulaka Seti Jataka, which describes a young man picks up a dead mouse which he sells and works up this capital till he becomes rich. With humblest start. This story was told by the master about the elder named Little Wayman while in Jivaka's mango grove near Rajagoha, and here an account of Little Wayman's birth must be given. Tradition tells us that the daughter of a rich merchant's family in Rajagoha actually stooped to intimacy with a slave. Being alarmed lest her misconduct should get known, she said to the slave, "We can't live on here, for if my mother and father come to know of this sin of ours, they will tear us limb from limb. Let us go and live afar off." So with their belongings in their hands, they stole together out by the hardly opened door, and fled away, they cared not whither, to find a shelter beyond the ken of her family. Then they went and lived together in a certain place, with the result that she conceived. And when her full time was nearly come, she told her husband and said, "If I am taken in labour away from kith and kin, that will be a trouble for both of us, so let us go home." First he agreed to start today, and then he put it off till the morrow, and so he let the days slip by till she thought to herself, "This fool is so conscious of his great offence that he dares not go. One's parents are one's best friends, so whether he goes or stays, I must go." So when he went out, she put all her household matters in order and set off home, telling her next-door neighbour where she was going. Returning home, and not finding his wife, but discovering from the neighbours that she had started off home, he hurried after her, and came up with her on the road. And then and there she was taken in labour. "What's this, my dear?" said he. "I have given birth to a son, my husband," said she. Accordingly, as the very thing had now happened which was the only reason for the journey, they both agreed that it was no good going on now, and so turned back again. And as their child had been born by the way, they called him Wayman. I think we have that as an English surname as well. Not long after, she became with child again, and everything fell out as before. And as this second child too was born by the way, they called him Wayman too, distinguishing the elder as Great Wayman and the younger as Little Wayman. Then, with both their children, they again went back to their own home. Now, as they were living there, their way child heard other boys talking of their uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers. So he asked his mother, whether he hadn't got relations like the other boys. "Oh yes, my dear," said his mother, "but they don't live here. Your grandfather is a wealthy merchant in the city of Rajagaha, and you have plenty of relations there." "Why don't we go there, mother?" She told the boy the reason why they stayed away. But as the children kept on speaking about these relations, she said to her husband, "The children are always plaguing me. Are my parents going to eat us at sight? Come, let us show the children their grandfather's family." "Well, I don't mind taking them there, but I really could not face your parents." "All right, so long as, some way or other, the children come to see their grandfather's family," said she. So those two took the children, and coming in due course to Rajagaha, put up in a public rest house by the city gate. Then, taking with them the two children, the women caused their coming to be made known to their parents. The latter, on hearing the message, returned this answer: "True, it is strange to be without children unless one has renounced the world in quest of arhatship. Still, so great is the guilt of the pair towards us that they may not stand in our sight. Here is a sum of money for them. Let them take this and retire to live where they will. But the children they may send here." Then the merchant's daughter took the money so sent her, and dispatched the children by the messengers. So the children grew up in their grandfather's house, little Wayman being of tender years, while great Wayman used to go with his grandfather to hear the Buddha preach the truth. And by constant hearing of the truth from the master's own lips, the lad's heart yearned to renounce the world for the life of a brother. "With your permission," said he to his grandfather, "I should like to join the brotherhood." What do I hear?" cried the old man. "Why, it would give me a greater joy to see you join the order than to see the whole world join. Become a brother if you feel able." And he took him to the master. "Well, merchant," said the master, "have you brought your boy with you?" "Yes, sir, this is my grandson who wishes to join your brotherhood." Then the master sent for the mendicant and told him to admit the lad to the order. And the mendicant repeated the formula of the perishable body. This is something to do with verses of impermanence, and admitted the lad as a novice. When the lad had learned by heart many words of the Buddha, and was old enough, he was admitted a full brother. He now gave himself up to earnest thought till he won arhatship, and as he passed his days in the enjoyment of insight and the path, he thought whether he could not impart the like happiness to little Wayman, his younger brother. So he went to his grandfather, the merchant, and said, "Great merchant, with your consent, I will admit the little Wayman to the order." "Pray do so, reverend sir," was the reply. And then the elder admitted the lad little Wayman, and established him in the 10 Commandments precepts. But little Wayman proved a dullard, old-fashioned term for someone not so bright. With 4 months' study, he failed to get by heart even a single stanza, such as this one. "Lo, like a fragrant lotus at the dawn of day, full blown with virgin warmth of scent, behold the Buddha's glory shining forth, as in the vaulted heaven beams the sun." For, as we were told in the Buddhahood of Kassapa, I'm not sure if he was directly preceding the Buddha, but he was the Buddha, a previous Buddha from Shakyamuni of a different age. In the Buddha of Kassapa, in Sanskrit it's Kashyapa, I think, this little Wayman, having himself attained to knowledge as a brother, laughed to scorn a dull brother who was learning a passage by heart. His son so confused that the latter could not learn or recite the passage. I see. So he was treating with contempt a younger monk, and this distracted the monk. And now, in consequence, on joining the brotherhood, lives later, he himself proved a dullard. Each new line he learned drove the last out of his memory, and 4 months slipped away while he was struggling with this single stanza. Said his elder brother to him, "Wayman, you are not equal to receiving this doctrine. In 4 whole months you have been unable to learn a single stanza. How then can you hope to crown your vocation with supreme success? Leave the monastery. But though thus expelled by his brother, little Wayman was so attached to the Buddha's creed that he did not want to become a layman. Now at the time, the great Wayman was acting as steward, and Jatakamala Butcher, going to his mango grove with a large present of perfumes and flowers for the master, had presented his offering and listened to a discourse. Then, rising from his seat and bowing to the Buddha, he went up to great Wayman and asked, "How many brethren are there, Reverend Sir, with the master?" "Just 500, sir." "Will you bring the 500 brethren with the Buddha at their head to take their meal at my house tomorrow? Lay disciple, one of them named Little Wayman, is a dullard and makes no progress in the path," said the elder. "I accept the invitation for everyone but him." Hearing this, Little Wayman thought to himself, "In accepting the invitation for all these brethren, the elder carefully accepts so as to exclude me. This proves that my brother's affection for me is dead. What have I to do with this faith? I will become a layman and live in the exercise of charity and other good works of lay character." And on the morrow and early he went forth, avowedly to become a layman again. Now at the first break of day, as he was surveying the world, the master became aware of this, and going forth even earlier than Little Wayman, he paced to and fro by the porch on Little Wayman's road. As the latter came out of the house, he observed the master, and with a salutation went up to him. "Whither away at this hour, Little Wayman?" said the master. "My brother has expelled me from the order, sir. I am going to wander forth." "Little Wayman, as it was under me that you took the vows, why did you not, when expelled by your brother, come to me? Come, what have you to do with a layman's life? You should stop with me." So saying, he took Little Wayman and seated him at the door of his own perfumed chamber. Then giving him a piece of perfectly clean cloth which he had supernaturally created, the master said, "Face towards the east, and as you handle this cloth, repeat these words: removal of impurity, removal of impurity." Then at the time appointed the master, attended by the brotherhood, went to Jivaka's house and sat down on the seat set for him. Now Little Wayman, with his gaze fixed on the sun, sat handling the cloth and repeating the words, "removal of impurity, removal of impurity." And as he kept handling the piece of cloth, it grew soiled. Then he thought, "Just now this piece of cloth is quite clean, but my personality has destroyed its original state and made it dirty. Impermanent indeed are all compounded things." And even as he realized death and decay, he won the Arhat's illumination. Knowing that Little Wayman's mind had won illumination, the master sent forth an apparition, and in the semblance of himself appeared before him, as if seated in front of him, and saying, "Heed it not, Little Wayman, that this mere piece of cloth has become dirty and stained with impurity. Within thee are the impurities of lust and other evil things. Remove them." And the apparition uttered these stanzas: "Impurity in lust consists not dirt, and lust we term the real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified. Impurity in wrath consists not dirt, and wrath we term the real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified. Delusion is impurity, not dirt. We term delusion real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified." At the close of these stanzas, Little Wayman attained to arhatship with the 4 branches of knowledge, whereby he straightway claimed to have knowledge of all the sacred texts. Tradition has it that in ages past, when he was a king and was making a solemn procession round his city, he wiped the sweat from his brow with a spotless cloth which he was wearing, and the cloth was stained. Thought he, "It is this body of mine which has destroyed the original purity and whiteness of the cloth and dirtied it. Impermanent indeed are all composite things." Thus he grasped the idea of impermanence, and hence it came to pass that it was the removal of impurity which worked his salvation. Meanwhile, Jatakamala Butcher offered the water of donation, but the master put his hand over the vessel, saying, "Are there no brethren, Jivaka, in the monastery?" Said great Wayman, "There are no brethren there, Reverend Sir." "Oh yes, there are, Jivaka," said the master. "Hi there," said Jivaka to a servant. "Just you go and see whether or not there are any brethren in the monastery." At that moment little Wayman, conscious as he was that his brother was declaring there were no brethren in the monastery, was determined to show him that there were, and so filled the whole mangrove grove with nothing but brothers. Some were making roads, others dying the robes, not dying deceased, dying the robes, dying with a Y, whilst others again were repeating the sacred texts. Each of 1,000 brethren he made unlike all the others. Finding this host of brethren in the monastery, the man returned and said that the whole mangrove grove was full of brethren. But as regards the elder up in the monastery, Wayman, 1,000-fold self-multiplied, sat on till bidden in that pleasant grove. "Now go back," said the brother to the man, "and say the master sends for him whose name is little Wayman." But when the man went and delivered his message, 1,000 mouths answered, "I am little Wayman, I am little Wayman." Back came the man with the report. "They all say that they are little Wayman, Reverend Sir." "Well, now go back," said the master, "and take by the hand the first one of them who says he is little Wayman, and the others will all vanish." The man did it as he was bidden, and straightway the 1,000 brethren vanished from sight. The elder came back with the man. When the meal was all over, the master said, "Jivaka, take little Wayman's ball, he will return thanks." Jivaka did so. Then, like a young lion roaring defiance, the elder ranged the whole of the sacred text through in his address of thanks. Lastly, the master rose from his seat and, attended by the order, returned to the monastery, and there, after the assignment of tasks by the brotherhood, he rose from his seat and, standing in the doorway of his perfumed chamber, delivered a Buddha discourse to the brotherhood. Ending with a theme which he gave for the meditation and dismissing the brotherhood, he retired into his perfumed chamber and lay down lion-like on his right side to rest. At even, the orange-robed brethren assembled together from all sides in the hall of truth and sang the master's praises, even as though they were spreading a curtain of orange cloth round them as they sat. "Brethren," it was said, "great Wayman failed to recognize the bent of little Wayman, and he expelled him from the monastery as a dullard who could not even learn a single stanza in the 4 whole months. But the all-knowing Buddha, by his supremacy in the truth, bestowed on him arhatship with all its supernatural knowledge, even while a single meal was in progress. And by that knowledge he grasped the whole of the sacred texts. Oh, how great is the Buddha's power!" Now the Blessed One, knowing full well the talk that was going on in the hall of truth, thought it meet to go there. So rising from his Buddha couch, he donned his 2 orange undercloths, girded himself as with lightning, arrayed himself in his orange-coloured robe, the ample robe of a Buddha, and came forth to the hall of truth with an infinite grace of a Buddha, moving with the royal gait of an elephant in the plenitude of his figure. Ascending the glorious Buddha throne, set in the midst of the resplendent hall, he seated himself upon the middle of the throne, emitting those 6 coloured rays which mark a Buddha. I think those are exactly the ones I mentioned at the start: blue, yellow, red, white, orange. No, that's only 5, isn't it? Oh, well, this is 6 coloured. Like the newly arisen sun, when from the peaks of the Yogandhara mountains he illumines the depths of the ocean. Immediately the all-knowing one came into the hall. The brotherhood broke off their talk and were silent. Gazing on the company with gentle loving kindness, the master thought within himself, "This company is perfect. Not a man is guilty of moving hand or foot improperly. Not a sound, not a cough or sneeze is to be heard. In their reverence and awe of the majesty and glory of the Buddha, not a man would dare to speak before I did, even if I sat here in silence all my life long. But it is my part to begin, and I will open the conversation." Then in his sweet divine tones he addressed the brethren and said, "What, pray, is the theme of this conclave? And what is the talk which was broken off?" "Sir," said they, "it was no profitless theme, but your own praises that we were telling here in conclave." And when they had told him word for word what they had been saying, the master said, "Brethren, through me little Wayman has just now risen to great things in the faith. In times past It was to great things in the way of wealth that he rose, but equally through me. The brethren asked the Master to explain this, and the Blessed One made clear in these words a thing which succeeding existences had hidden from them. So we'll leave the actual story for next week. So that's story number 4. Just make a note of it. So I'm glad to be sharing these stories with you. We've covered, we've about halfway through the 4th one already. This 1 week. Rinpoche asked me to teach the karma biting classes on the Tuesdays, which are just before this, which I was happy to do so, and I also felt encouraged to do these teachings as well. So I know it can take a bit of getting used to the sort of old style of the storytelling and that type of thing a bit. So thank you for being a bit patient and sticking with it. And we'll rejoice in the merit and positive energy that we've generated in this session, and we'll do the dedication of merits now, and we'll see you next time. By this merit may we overcome the defilements and gain omniscience. May I liberate all beings from the ocean of birth, old age, sickness, death. Here in the Mahayana teachings, whatever merit I have accrued, may all beings, the exception, attain to all the Mahayana teachings. Courageous Manja, she knew all things, and Samantabhadra, dear likewise, following all of their examples. I shall dedicate all these merits. May the excellent Bodhicitta take birth where it has not yet done so. Where it has been born, may it increase freely without degeneration. So thank you all for your company. I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Jamyang.
Bye-bye.